right, we're back and we're going to be discussing Chapter 10, Psychosocial Development in Early Childhood. This will be our last chapter for the 2 to 6 year old phase. So let's go ahead and get started. So for this first video, I wanted to do a live, participatory kind of survey where you could get out a piece of paper and a pencil and actually record your answers like you would do in the classroom. So there's going to be a series of statements, and you're going to use a 5-point scale to describe how that statement applies to you and your mother or your caregiver growing up, whoever your primary caregiver was. So you're going to try to think about each statement as it applies to you and your mother, if your mother was your primary caregiver or whoever that was. And you want to think about back when you were growing up and you were in the home. It's kind of a little tougher when we're adults to separate out, things that happened to us in our childhood versus how you now understand them to be. So try to think about your perspective as a child growing up so that you can kind of answer the questions based on that. There are no right or wrong answers. Obviously, the questions are going to be asking about your particular experience. And so the only correct answer is your interpretation of your personal experience. So we're looking for your overall impression regarding each statement, and don't skip any items. Sometimes students get frustrated with these psychology scales because they're like, well, I don't know, I don't even know how I would answer that. It's best not to skip. Go ahead and put neutral or something like that if you're not sure how to answer, and that way you can have a more meaningful total score on the scale. So the scale is going to run from 1 to 5. If you pick 1, that means that you strongly disagree. If you pick 5, it means you strongly agree. 3 means neither, just a neutral answer. 2 means you disagree, and 4 means you agree. So you've got sort of these, polar ends are the strongly agree and strongly disagree. 1 tick in is agree or disagree, and then the middle would be neither. All right, so let's get going. So number 1, while I was growing up, my mother felt that in a well-run home, the children should have their way in the family as often as the parents do. Now I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. You can always pause me if you need to think about it and before you do your answer, but I'm just going to go through them kind of quickly. Normally in class, I would read each question twice, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it once. Number 2, even if her children didn't agree with her, my mother felt that it was for our own good if we were forced to conform to what she thought was right. So see, I stammered on that one. So even if her children didn't agree with her, my mother felt that it was for our own good if we were forced to conform to what she thought was right. 3, whenever my mother told me to do something as I was growing up, she expected me to do it immediately without asking any questions. 4, once family policy had been established, my mother discussed the reasoning behind the policy with the children in the family. 5, my mother has always encouraged verbal give and take whenever I have felt that family rules and restrictions were unreasonable. 6, my mother has always felt that what children need is to be free to make up their own minds and to do what they want to do, even if this does not agree with what their parents might want. 7, my mother did not allow me to question any decision she had made. 8, my mother directed the activities and decisions of the children in the family through reasoning and discipline. 9, my mother has always felt that more force should be used by parents in order to get their children to behave the way they are supposed to. 10, my mother did not feel that I needed to obey rules and regulations of behavior simply because someone in authority had established them. 11, I knew what my mother expected of me and my family, but I also felt free to discuss those expectations with my mother when I felt that they were unreasonable. 12, my mother felt that wise parents should teach their children early just who is boss in the family. 13, my mother seldom gave me expectations and guidelines for my behavior. 14, most of the time, as I was growing up, my mother did what the children in the family wanted when making family decisions. 15, my mother consistently gave the children in her family direction and guidance in rational and objective ways. 16, my mother would get very upset if I tried to disagree with her. 17, my mother feels that most problems in society would be solved if parents would not restrict their children's activities, decisions, and desires as they are growing up. 18, my mother let me know what behavior she expected of me, and if I didn't meet those expectations, she punished me. 19, My mother allowed me to decide most things for myself without a lot of direction from her. 20. My mother took the children's opinions into consideration when making family decisions, but she would not decide for something simply because the children wanted it. 21. My mother did not view herself as responsible for directing and guiding my behavior as I was growing up. 22. My mother had clear standards of behavior for the children in our home as I was growing up, but she was willing to adjust those standards to the needs of each of the individual children in the family. 23. My mother gave me direction for my behavior and activities as I was growing up, and she expected me to follow her direction, but she was always willing to listen to my concerns and to discuss that direction with me. 24. My mother allowed me to form my own point of view on family matters, and she generally allowed me to decide for myself what I was going to do. 25. My mother has always felt that most problems in society would be solved if we could get parents to strictly and forcibly deal with their children when they don't do what they are supposed to as they are growing up. 26. My mother often told me exactly what she wanted me to do and how she expected me to do it. 27. My mother gave me clear direction for my behaviors and activities, but she was also understanding when I disagreed with her. 28. My mother did not direct the behaviors, activities, and desires of the children in the family. 29. I knew what my mother expected of me in the family, and she insisted that I conform to those expectations simply out of respect for her authority. 30. If my mother made a decision in the family that hurt me, she was willing to discuss that decision with me and to admit if she had made a mistake. All right. So hopefully you paused me as needed and actually answered all the questions to the survey, because what you just completed is what is known as the Parental Authority Questionnaire. It's comprised of 3 subscales, and you might have noticed there were certain questions that seemed kind of repetitious, like sometimes it was phrased in a positive way, and then the next time it included the word not, things like that. Those were items that made up different subscales. So what I want you to do is go through your list of responses and put a circle around items 1, 6, 10, 13, 14, 17, 19, 21, 24, and 28. Okay, so those should have circles around it. Now I want you to go through and put a square around items 2, 3, 7, 9, 12, 16, 18, 25, 26, and 29. All right, and then that should leave these items 4, 5, 8, 11, 15, 20, 22, 23, 27, and 30 unmarked. So you'll be able to distinguish those 3, the items that make up that third scale, by it being the unmarked items. What you're going to do is add up the individual items on each of those subscales. So add up the numbers that you gave in response to the items that have circles around it. And then do the same thing for the items that have squares around it. And do the same thing for the items that don't have any marks on them. Go ahead and pause me, do that so you'll have a score, and then come back. All right, hopefully you have scores for all 3 subscales now, and now I will reveal that the subscales scores can range from 10 to 30, so that's a good way to check your math. If you have a number that's less than 10 or more than 30, then you know you did something wrong in your math, and go back and check that. Okay, so the first subscale, those items that you put a circle around, make up the permissive subscale. So if you have a high score on that subscale, if that's your highest score, then that'll mean that your mom was most commonly permissive, or your caregiver was. The next subscale measures authoritarian parenting. And then the third one measures authoritative parenting. So there's not really a number that I can tell you is the cutoff. What you're looking for is which of those 3 is the highest score. Or do you have one that is low, like distinctly lowest, and 2 that are kind of equal? That might happen sometimes with our parents. We have, parents who kind of bounce between 2 styles, but there's clearly a style that is not their style. So that's what you're trying to establish. What was your mom's, in this case, or whoever your caregiver was that you were thinking about when you took this scale? What was their typical style or styles that they used the most consistently? So I think that's probably a long enough video just by itself. We'll come back in the next video and we'll start applying what those parenting styles mean and how they impact developing children. So I'll see you in the next video.